They say the opposite of love is hate, but anyone who has studied the psychology of relationships knows that isn't true. Hate still carries heat. Hate still means you care enough to react, to argue, to want your voice heard. The true opposite of love is indifference. Imagine a house where the screaming has stopped. No more slammed doors, no more late-night arguments that leave everyone exhausted and raw. The tension that once crackled in the air like static electricity is gone. To an outsider, it looks peaceful, mature even, like the storm has finally passed. But for one person in that marriage, the silence isn't peace, it's a countdown. We often imagine divorce as an explosion, one defining moment, a betrayal, a discovery, a final fight that pushes everything over the edge. But psychologically, the end of a marriage almost never begins that way. It begins quietly, invisibly, in the mind of one partner, long before any papers are signed or words are spoken out loud. It happens in the small moments, in the conversations that no longer feel worth having, in the feelings that are swallowed instead of shared, in the realization that explaining yourself, for the 100th time, will only lead to the same emptiness. This is what psychologists sometimes refer to as an emotional divorce, or in more modern language, quiet quitting a marriage. One partner is still physically present, sharing meals, sharing space, sharing a bed. But emotionally, they've already begun to leave. They're no longer trying to fix the relationship. They're trying to survive it. And the most unsettling part? From the outside, nothing seems wrong. No fighting, no drama, just calm. But sometimes, that calm isn't healing. Sometimes it's the sound of love slowly disappearing, without a single door ever being slammed. When most people hear the word divorce, they picture a legal event. Papers, lawyers, courtrooms, a signature at the bottom of a page that officially ends a marriage. But psychologically, divorce almost never begins there. Long before the paperwork, there is a quieter separation taking place, one that happens entirely in the mind. This is what therapists often call emotional divorce. It's the moment when one partner stops experiencing the relationship as a shared we and starts experiencing it as a private struggle they must manage alone. Nothing outward may change at first. Daily routines continue. Conversations still happen. Life looks normal enough to everyone else. But internally, something has shifted. The partner begins to detach not just emotionally, but cognitively. They stop imagining a future that includes the relationship. Decisions are no longer framed as what's best for us, but what do I need to survive this? The marriage becomes something to endure rather than something to build. This is why silent divorce is so difficult to detect. There is no obvious crisis, no single argument you can point to and say, that's when everything broke. Instead, the bond erodes quietly, through disappointment, repetition, and the slow exhaustion of feeling unseen. By the time the word divorce is finally spoken out loud, one partner has already grieved the relationship in private. They are emotionally miles ahead, and the other partner is only just beginning to realize that the distance didn't appear overnight. Most people believe that constant fighting is what destroys a marriage, that if two people argue too much, the relationship must already be broken. Psychologically, that's not entirely true. In many relationships, conflict isn't the absence of love, it's evidence of it. When a partner complains, criticizes, or keeps bringing up the same unresolved issue, they're often making a desperate emotional bid. What they're really saying is, see me, hear me, please change, because I still want this to work. This stage could be called repair mode. Fighting, exhausting as it is, still requires energy. It requires emotional investment. You don't argue passionately about something you've already given up on. You argue about what still matters, about what still hurts because it hasn't been healed. That's why the most dangerous moment in a marriage isn't constant conflict. It's when the conflict suddenly stops, when the questions disappear, when the complaints go quiet, when the partner who used to push for conversations now responds with, "It's fine," or "Do whatever you want." That silence isn't acceptance, it's resignation. Psychologically, this is the moment when hope begins to fade. The partner is no longer trying to fix the relationship. They've concluded, often after years of trying, that nothing they say will lead to change. So the mind does what it's wired to do when effort feels pointless. It conserves energy, and when someone stops fighting for connection, it's not because they stopped caring, it's because they stopped believing that caring would make a difference. There is a moment in many failing marriages that rarely gets talked about. It doesn't happen during a fight. It doesn't come with tears or raised voices, and no one announces it out loud. It's quiet. Psychologists sometimes refer to it as the switch, the internal point where the brain stops trying to repair the relationship and starts trying to protect the self. For a long time, the partner has been in repair mode, explaining, repeating, hoping, believing that if they just find the right words, the right timing, or the right level of patience, something will finally change. But over time, those efforts begin to feel useless. Each attempt is met with dismissal, defensiveness, or temporary change that never lasts. Eventually, the nervous system reaches a breaking point. The brain makes a sober, almost clinical assessment. Nothing I say matters. Nothing I do changes the outcome. Staying emotionally open only leads to more pain, and so it adapts. At first, the shift feels like numbness. Emotions flatten. The constant anxiety quiets down. There may even be a strange sense of relief. Not because the situation is better, but because the internal battle is finally over. The partner stops hoping, and in doing so, stops hurting as intensely. But this relief comes at a cost. Once the switch flips, the marriage is no longer experienced as a partnership. It becomes an environment to survive. The language inside the mind changes from "How do we fix this?" to "How do I get through this without losing myself?" This is the true beginning of silent divorce. From the outside, it looks like calm. From the inside, it's emotional shutdown, a protective response that slowly, quietly prepares someone to leave. There is a particular kind of calm that signals the most danger in a marriage. Not the calm that comes after understanding, not the calm that comes from resolution, but the calm that comes from giving up. This is often referred to as walkaway syndrome, a phase where one partner has emotionally exited the relationship long before they physically leave it. And what makes it so devastating is how easily it's misunderstood. The partner stops complaining, stops asking for change, stops initiating difficult conversations. To the other person, this can feel like relief. Finally, the tension is gone. Finally, things feel easier. But psychologically, this calm has nothing to do with acceptance. It comes from a quiet decision. I'm done trying. When someone reaches this stage, they are no longer investing emotional energy into the relationship. And that's not because they don't care. It's because they've learned that caring only leads to disappointment. The mind once again shifts into conservation mode. Hope requires energy. Fighting requires energy. Trying requires energy. Walkaway syndrome is what happens when the brain decides that energy is better spent elsewhere. On self-preservation, on emotional distance, on preparing for a life beyond the marriage. This is why a sudden drop in conflict is often far more concerning than constant arguing. Conflict means there's still something to lose. Silence means the loss has already been accepted internally. The tragedy of walkaway syndrome is that it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. By the time the calm feels real, one partner has already walked away emotionally. And once that internal goodbye has happened, reversing it becomes incredibly difficult. Not because the love never existed, but because the hope quietly died first. Once the decision to emotionally detach has been made, something subtle but profound begins to happen. The partner starts placing their inner world behind glass. This is what could be described as an emotional quarantine, a self-protective barrier designed to prevent further injury. They stop sharing what they feel, not because they have nothing inside, but because exposing it has become too costly. Conversations grow polite, functional, shallow. How was your day becomes a report, not a reflection. Joy is kept private. Stress is handled alone. Dreams, fears, and disappointments no longer feel safe enough to bring into the relationship. From the outside, this can look like indifference, emotional flatness, even coldness. But psychologically, it's rarely apathy, it's containment. The mind has learned a painful lesson. Vulnerability no longer leads to connection. It leads to dismissal, misunderstanding, or emotional exhaustion. So the system adapts by shutting the door. This is why many people describe feeling like they're living with a roommate or a polite stranger. You share space, you share logistics, but you no longer share an inner life. The loneliness that forms inside the marriage can feel deeper than being physically alone, because the person you once reached for is still right there and unreachable. At the same time, this emotional withdrawal serves another purpose. It slowly untangles identity. By not sharing their inner world, the partner begins rehearsing independence. They are learning how it feels to exist emotionally on their own while still inside the relationship. The wall of indifference isn't built to punish, it's built to survive. But once that wall goes up, intimacy doesn't just fade, it has nowhere left to land. Once emotional detachment is complete, the psychology of the relationship shifts again. Grief gives way to strategy. At this stage, the partner is no longer asking, "Why is this happening to us?" They're asking, "How do I get out of this safely?" This is where survival becomes tactical. Love may be emotional, but divorce is practical. It involves money, logistics, and leverage, and the partner preparing to leave understands this instinctively. Long before the word divorce is spoken, a quiet form of separation often begins behind the scenes. Financially, this can look like subtle distancing, a sudden interest in credit scores, conversations about better budgeting, a push for separate accounts, or a reluctance to make long-term purchases together. This isn't always theft or malice, it's preparation. Rent, legal fees, emergency cushions. Money becomes more than currency, it becomes safety. Psychologically, this financial planning restores a sense of control. After years of feeling powerless, numbers are concrete, predictable, reassuring. They provide structure in a situation that once felt emotionally chaotic. At the same time, information becomes a form of armor. Important documents are quietly gathered. Copies are made, passwords are changed. Devices are kept closer than before. Not necessarily because of secrets involving another person, but because privacy has become essential for planning. The partner may be researching lawyers, housing options, or simply trying to understand what life looks like on the other side of the marriage. This heightened vigilance often comes from a state of chronic emotional stress. When someone has felt unsafe, emotionally or psychologically, for a long time, the nervous system learns to stay alert. Every detail matters. Every contingency is considered. This isn't paranoia, it's adaptation. To the unsuspecting partner, these behaviors can feel sudden, confusing, or even threatening. But from the inside, they feel rational, necessary, protective. By this point, the person preparing for divorce is no longer emotionally debating whether to stay. That question has already been answered. What remains is execution, careful, quiet, and controlled. The relationship has shifted from a shared emotional bond into a situation to manage. And management, unlike love, leaves very little room for vulnerability. As the emotional and practical separation deepens, another shift begins, one that is often the most painful to discover. the partner starts building a version of themselves that exists outside the marriage. This doesn't always look dramatic. There may be no affair, no obvious betrayal. Instead, it shows up in quieter ways. New hobbies, a renewed focus on fitness, reconnecting with old friends, staying longer at work, smiling more in spaces where the spouse is not present. Psychologically, this is the construction of a parallel self, a future identity that does not depend on the relationship. It's a form of rehearsal, a way of answering the unspoken question, who am I without this marriage? These moments of lightness can be deeply confusing to the partner who is still emotionally invested. They may notice that their spouse seems energized elsewhere, yet distant at home. Laughter returns, but not with them. Warmth exists, but behind closed doors, they aren't invited into. What's often missed is that this phase is rarely free of inner conflict. Alongside the relief and excitement, there is guilt, a quiet sense of disloyalty, the discomfort of feeling alive again, while someone close to you remains in the dark. Many people hold both emotions at once, hope and shame, freedom and grief. This split creates a strange fragmentation of identity. One version of the person functions inside the marriage, calm, distant, emotionally muted. Another version begins to bloom elsewhere, curious, expressive, future-oriented. By the time this parallel life feels real, the emotional bond at home has already thinned to a thread. The marriage may still exist in structure and routine, but psychologically, a different life has already started, one that no longer has space for us, only for what comes next. One of the most disorienting phases of silent divorce happens near the very end. Just when everything has felt distant, heavy, or emotionally numb for so long, something shifts. The partner who has been withdrawn suddenly seems lighter, kinder, more cooperative. They stop complaining. They stop pushing. In some cases, they even seem happier than they have in years. To the other partner, this can feel like hope. Maybe we finally turned a corner. Maybe all that space was exactly what we needed. But psychologically, this calm often has a very different source. This is what therapists sometimes refer to as exit euphoria, the emotional relief that comes from making a final internal decision. The question of stay or leave is no longer being debated. The mental tug-of-war is over, and when prolonged uncertainty ends, the nervous system relaxes. That relief can look like peace. It can even look like love returning, but it isn't reconciliation. It's resolution. The person has already accepted the ending. They are no longer fighting themselves, no longer rehearsing conversations in their head, no longer carrying the weight of indecision, and because of that, they may appear more present, more agreeable, more emotionally regulated. What's rarely seen is what comes next. Exit euphoria is often short-lived. Once the truth is spoken, once the decision becomes real and irreversible, another emotional wave tends to follow. Guilt, sadness, fear, the sudden collapse of the identity they've been quietly building toward. But from the outside, all you see is the calm, a calm that feels earned, a calm that feels hopeful. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because sometimes, the moment things feel the most peaceful is the moment the goodbye has already been decided. When a silent divorce finally becomes a spoken reality, the emotional impact feels uneven, almost cruel in its timing. One partner appears calm, resolved, sometimes even relieved. The other feels blindsided, shattered, desperately searching for the moment when everything went wrong. Psychologically, this isn't because one person cared more than the other. It's because they've been grieving on two completely different timelines. The partner who leaves has already mourned the relationship in private. They process the loss slowly, over months or years of disappointment, detachment, and emotional withdrawal. By the time they speak the truth out loud, They are often at the end of their grief cycle. The partner who is left behind is only just beginning. They replay conversations, search for missed signs, ask questions that now have no answers, and the silence that once felt confusing suddenly becomes devastatingly clear. What looked like peace was preparation. What felt like distance was goodbye. It's important to say this clearly. Silent divorce does not make someone evil, and being left does not mean someone failed. More often, it means two people lost connection long before either of them knew how to name it. Sometimes silence is not cruelty, it's fear. Sometimes it's self-protection, taken too far. If this story feels painfully familiar, you're not alone. Many people live through the quiet end of a relationship without ever being given language for it. If this video helped you feel seen or understood, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the quiet, often unspoken parts of human psychology here. And if you have thoughts, questions, or a story of your own, you're invited to share it in the comments. Sometimes healing begins not with answers, but with realizing that what you felt was real. Thank you for watching.